Okay, we will wait a little bit and then we'll start soon. Okay, so we'll start with today the basic anatomy of the nervous system, which is the organizations of the nervous system. So this might be your, the study of the anatomy of the nervous system will help you to understand the organizations and so on about this system. Now, the nervous system here is divided into two major systems. It's the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Okay. The central nervous system is actually isolated from the other part of the body in a sense, in which that we will talk about is called the blood-brain barrier, in which that the circulatory system cannot directly go into the central nervous system. Okay, so that is actually a protective mechanism as well as a arrangement to prevent the interference of the central nervous system, because the central nervous system basically is controlling your body, your thinking, and your movement, and so on. All the cognitive or unconscious functions. Now, the peripheral nervous system is divided into several parts. Okay, the first one is the somatic nervous system, which include the spinal nerves and cranial nerves. Okay, the spinal nerves actually control the sensations and also the movement. So, for example, how you sense from your skin and so on, and the movement of your body, that's controlled by these spinal nerves. So it's the nerves coming from the spinal cord, in which we will talk about the spinal cord later, maybe today, or if not, then maybe next week. Cranial nerves are actually a bit different. So it's at the top. The brainstem part is from here, and then the nerves go out and control major the facial, the head, and the eye and the ears. We'll talk about those in more detail. Okay. Now, then there will be autonomic nervous system. Okay, that includes the sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system. So those maybe you have studied before, that in the physiology, the sympathetic and parasympathetic. Okay, especially the sympathetic, the fight or flight response. That's from the sympathetic. But this is not just that. actually control a lot of the autonomic functions, okay? Both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, work together to control a lot of autonomic physiology. Now, there's another one, is the enteric nervous system, which include the submucosa and the mesenteric plexus. Now, we'll also talk about this. Is actually the one that control a lot of enteric. So that means that the digestive tract, the intestine, and so on. So you might not aware that actually there's a lot of neurons over there as well to control the process of the digestion. Okay, that might also be the reason why that if you are not feeling well, if you have a diarrhea, or if you have anything that actually in your gut is not functioning well, or you have eaten something bad, that actually can affect you. And basically, actually, is getting more interesting, in which that you might heard about it. The microflora in the intestine actually can have effects at the immune system and also in the brain as well. Okay, so that's the reason why that eating healthy is very important as well. Now, for the central nervous system, that includes the spinal cord and the brain. Okay, that's the brain that actually the higher functions. Now, in the spinal cord, there are white matter. There are also gray matter as well. Same in the brain, actually, when we talk about it. Now, if you have if you have seen or have a dissect or a brain or a spinal cord, okay, then you see that there's a part is gray in color and the outer is white in color. Now, the gray matters actually contain the cell body. So that's the reason why the color is darker, okay? And the white matter is actually mainly the fiber tract, and then really rich in the fat. Okay, we'll talk about why it is the fat is called the myelin, which is make up of fat or lipid. Now, in the brain is further divided into different parts: high brain, midbrain, and forebrain. Okay, so those are different parts. Now, the way that actually happens like this is actually, it's because that how the people studying anatomy, and they name different parts. Okay, and actually different part has different functions as well. So the high brain contains the medulla, pons, and cerebellum. Midbrain include the ventral tectum, dorsal tectum. Forebrain include the diencephalon and cerebrum. Okay, those are different parts. Now, don't worry too much about those terms. Don't make you panic about I'm going to test you on the names. I'm not going to test you on the names, but more importantly, how you integrate it. Why the anatomy needs to is just a language for us to communicate when we talk about certain structures. Okay, so that we don't need to always refer to the diagram and so on. Okay, but certainly they also have different functions. Okay, so this is the overview what we just talked about. The brain here. Okay, this is cerebrum, and then cerebellum and brainstem over here. Okay, so this is the brain, and here is the spinal cord. Okay, and from the spinal cord and from the cranial nerves, so branch out those so-called peripheral nervous system. Okay, so you can see that they are branching out all the way, and you can see that they are actually pretty long. Okay, and then here is this differentiations: the peripheral nervous system, somatic nervous system, autonomic nervous system, enteric nervous system. Okay, and the central nervous system will be spinal cord and the brain as well. Okay, so we can first talk about the somatic nervous system. That include the spinal nerves and the cranial nerves. Okay, the spinal nerves is actually including spinal cord. There are 31 pair of it from the spinal cord, so all the way from the top to the around the thoracic. We'll look at it, the figure later. Now, the cranial nerves actually is from the brainstem actually. So brainstem is actually from around this region, okay? And down there, that will be the spinal cord. So there are 12 pairs, okay? It's coming out, so because this is coming out in both ways, from the left-hand side and the right-hand side, okay? Controlling the left side and the right side correspondingly, okay? Now, in the spinal nerves, there are sensory and the motor fibers. So we will look at it. So each one coming out, they contain the sensory and the motor fibers. Yes, that's correct from the dorsal and ventral. We'll talk about it. So it's coming out in the dorsal and ventral. Yeah, you're right. So one of the students just talked about, he thought that the dorsal spinal nerves are sensory and the ventral spinal nerves are motor. So we'll talk about those, the structure. Now, but this is a little bit different from the cranial nerves. So 4 pairs are mixed. So coming out, that means that they contain both sensory and motor. And the others are actually, purely sensory or purely motor. Okay, we'll look at it in the structure. So here you go. You have different nerve coming out. Okay, so for example, oculomotor, vestibular, cochlear. Those are the nerves coming from the brainstem. So this is the where that we talk about. This is the brainstem part, and then this is the spinal cord. Okay, those are the somatic nerves coming out. Okay, those here are the cranial nerve. Okay, so you can see that actually they mostly control the structure in the head, except some of those are actually going down, the vagus nerve in particular, going down to control different organs. Okay. Now, a little bit special in here is that actually these two are not coming from the cranial, from the brainstem. One is the olfactory. Another one is the optical nerve. Okay, so this is the olfactory nerve. Actually, is right actually inside the nose. So you know that from now on, if you have done the testing for the coronavirus, they will stuck a tube inside your nose, the cavity of the nose. Okay, so it's here actually, this pictures. Okay, so what they do is actually, they usually use face up, and then they will stick a really long stake into the cavity. So actually it's reaching here. Okay, now the olfactory nerve actually is right on top of here. Okay, and then they have a lot of endings coming down so that they can detect the chemicals and then provide the sense of smell. Okay, so that's the interesting part. Okay, now for the the optic nerve, so that one is actually go all the way to the behind the eye. Okay, get the signal from the eye, the retina, and you can see that actually that will merge and then go back to the if you still remember the introduction, the optical part. Okay. So don't worry too much. Again, I'm not going to test you. I'm not going to ask you to remember which one is doing what. Okay, just for your understanding. Okay, I'm not going to test you which nerve is the what is trigeminal nerve and what this is doing. So I'm not going to ask you to memorize. So those are only the one that needs to remember. For example, the doctors, and they need to remember all of them. You know, so you are lucky. You don't need to remember, just understand, and that's okay. Is it okay? So as I mentioned, there are 12 pairs of the cranial nerves emerged mainly from the brainstem, the part about the CNS, above the spinal cord. So as I mentioned, this is above the spinal cord, and then above it, just beneath, that is the brainstem. Okay. The cranial nerves actually mainly supply structure in the head and the abdomen. Okay, so as I mentioned, all the muscle and the movement at the at the head are controlled by this. Okay, and also in the abdomen. So that those are in the inside the abdomen. Okay. So the cranial nerves and their branches have motor fibers and sensory fibers, and both with different combinations. Okay. So after they emerge from the CNS, the 3 cranial nerves are considered to be sensory, 5 considered to be motor, 4 considered to be mixed. Okay. So it's just something that, you know, for what the reason behind that, you know, the anatomical study, scientists or the physician, usually they like to, you know, classify into different classes so that for them to easy to remember and study. So here is some of the example. Olfactory nerve, that's the sensory, very obvious. That's the smell. Optic is the sensory, the vision. Okay. Oculomotor, trachea, those are the eye muscle. So remember, the eye actually controlled by the muscle to move around. So, so for example, if there's a problem with those, so those people will have a so-called the cross eye, so that the eye is not usually at the central. So at that time, the doctor will need to work on those muscles to try to fix it if they want. The trigeminal actually is a mix, so you can see that sensory from the head and the face, and motor to the jaw and muscle. Okay. The eye muscle as well, so is a 3 pair of those actually control the eye muscle. The facial, the motor to the face, sensory, and the tongue and palate. So it's the upper part of the mouth. Now sensory, vestibular cochlea, so that's a sensory. So it's your listening is from that nerve. Okay. Glossopharyngeal, that's sensory from the tongue and motor to the pharyngeal muscle. Now vagus nerve is actually important one actually, that, you know, send out the nerve sensory from the visceral, motor, and the pharyngeal as well. Okay. The motor plate and neck muscle, and the motor of the tongue muscle. So you can see that actually that control most of the sensory, all of the sensory and the movement at the head. And sensory including the eyes, the smell, the hearing, and so on. Now, vagus nerve actually going down to the visceral organ, and then we will talk about it. That's a very important, especially for the parasympathetic system. Is it okay? Now, now we're going to the autonomic nervous system, also called the visceral motor system. Okay, and you can see that control a lot of different things. You know, now that originated with cell bodies in the brainstem and spinal cord. Okay, and then give rise to the preganglionic myelinated axon that can secrete the acetylcholine, and the unmyelinated one as well. That's the post-ganglionic sympathetic system. We will slowly go through those. So what does it mean is that in the sympathetic and parasympathetic system, or the so-called autonomic nervous system, they are coming out from the central nervous system. So here is the example of it. So what happens is that in the somatic nervous system, the neuron, the motor neurons or sensor neurons, the motor neurons particularly going out, release the acetylcholine. That's the skeletal muscle. So all those muscle, all the muscle in your body is controlled by this. They are from the spinal cord, okay? Now for the autonomic nervous system, for example, the sympathetic nervous system. Now, the sympathetic nervous system are a little bit different from the parasympathetic nervous system. And they're also different from the somatic one in their organizations, in which that their neurons is called the preganglionic. So ganglia is actually a group of neurons structure, a group of neurons outside, okay? And we'll look at it in more detail later. But it just here is that the preganglionic neurons, and then coming out from the spinal cord, and then going to the ganglionic neurons. Okay, it's here. In this case, okay, there are two different things in here that, you know, in here, the preganglionic neurons actually will secrete the acetylcholine, okay? That will control the postganglionic neurons here. And then that release neurotransmitter over here. Now, this neurotransmitter is sorry, this is the non-adrenaline. Okay, we will look at it in the next slide in more details. Now, in the sympathetic system, that can also, the postganglionic neurons can also secrete the acetylcholine as the postganglionic neurotransmitters. So both, okay. Now, this one is that you might ask, like, this is, okay. So one of your students asked what is different between the NIC and MUS. So that's actually a different receptor, different type of receptor. If you still remember a little bit in the introduction, this is the muscarinic receptor, sorry. And this is the nicotinic receptor. When we talk about acetylcholine as the neurotransmitter, then we will talk about the different type of receptor. Is it okay? Very good. Now you can at once like look at it and see the differences. Okay. So you may ask, where is the postganglionic neurons here in this part? Now, actually, the postganglionic neurons actually is in the adrenal medulla. It's the adrenal gland. So in the adrenal gland, actually, it is also containing some neurons, and that secrete the hormones out. Okay, so that's a very special way, a very special structure. Okay. Now, this is a little bit different in the parasympathetic system, and then you can see that the preganglionic neuron is in the spinal cord. And then this is the postganglionic neuron. Now you can see that they both use actually acetylcholine as their neurotransmitter, but they have different receptors. So this here again is the nicotinic receptors, and here is the muscarinic receptors. Okay, is it okay? So we talk about the ganglion. So ganglion is actually a part of the outside the central nervous system, and that reside a lot of neurons. Okay, so here is one of the figures. Now, one of your classmates mentioned about dorsal root ganglion. That's actually one of the sensory one. There are neurons actually here in the ganglion. So this is the dorsal root ganglion. So whenever we talk about ganglion, that's the swollen part because there are a lot of cells inside. A lot of those neurons are inside. Okay. Now in the parasympathetic nervous system, the postganglionic neurons, they are outside at the next to the spinal cord. Okay, so this is the one. This is the spinal cord. We have some better figures to show you later. And this is some of the special way how they organize them. Okay, the reason why then we don't know. So that's during the development or evolution, somehow this is arranged in this side. Okay. Most of this is so-called the paravertebral. Paravertebral means that it's next to the spinal cord. Okay, we will have some better pictures to show you later. Okay. Now there are one or two of those in sympathetic nervous system. Actually, they are a little bit different. It's far away. So we will have some that is those are called the subsidiary ganglia or prevertebrate ganglia. So the naming seems to be very complicated. So, but this is not that complicated actually. Para means next to it, is it? Para means next to it. So that means that those ganglia are next to the vertebrae. Subsidiary or prevertebral means that it's away after it's coming out. Is not next. Is after the vertebrae, then that's the ganglion, but it is not next to the vertebrae. Okay, so those are the sympathetic. Now, but the parasympathetic ganglia is always actually subsidiary or prevertebrate. That means it's away from the vertebrae. Is it okay? Anyone want to ask questions? So do you know why they call it autonomic nervous system? No, these two systems actually they are not controlled by the brain. Actually, it is not quite. It's still controlled by the brain, but it's mostly we cannot control those. Yes, non-consciously. Yes. So, for example, we never cannot control our. It's not consciously controlled. Yeah, it's very good. Yeah, it's not consciously controlled. Now, there are some reason for that because that some of the process that you don't want you to affect it. For example, you can never control your respiration. So you can stop it for a little bit, but at the end you cannot. Nobody can suicide by holding the breath. Or you cannot stop the heartbeat. So those are dolphins can hold the breath, but you cannot hold for too long. You can hold your breath for a certain time, but until some time, then you are overcome by the autonomic system. So those are the things that actually you cannot control very well. You cannot control permanently because of those are vital functions. And then also there's a good reason for that because your brain, your consciousness, you not need to take care of those things that you don't need to take care. So that's the reason why it's called autonomic nervous system. Okay. The sympathetic and parasympathetic somehow they actually counter each other. Very good, actually. So death can be defined by the stop functioning of autonomic nervous system. Yes, actually. So one of the, if you watch, drama all the time in those related to medicine, they always declare the patient death by brainstem death. So one of the reasons why the brainstem is, if the brainstem is dead, that means that the person is actually dead, because the brainstem control a lot of the vital function, for example, heartbeat, respiration, and so on. So if the brainstem is dead, then basically the person is dead. So yes, good, but the brainstem is not the autonomic nervous system. No, actually, that is not true, because a lot of those neurons, particularly the parasympathetic neurons that control the respiration and so on, they're coming out from the brainstem. Okay, so they're coming out from the brainstem. So why it is? So if you look at it over here, this picture, or here is better. It's very big. It's bigger. So brainstem is here. Can you see that? So the brainstem is actually inside the skull. Okay. So whenever the brain actually, so if you want to be interested in here that, so this is also give you some of the ideas about the anatomy. So the skull basically, store the brain and the brainstem. Now, when you heard about when people suffer from brain trauma, so brain trauma means that something hard or damage to the brain. So the brain trauma usually actually happens, for example, in the accident, something hard hit the skull, or some damage inside the brain. Usually the pressure inside the brain will be increased. But because this is in the skull, the only way one coming out is the hole at the interesting. I don't know whether you are looking at the chat. It's one of the students said that we can only live with our brainstem. Well, if you just with your brainstem without without your cerebrum, then you don't have any consciousness. So even so, it's if you have brain death, then that is you are just like vegetable. That's how they call it. Vegetable state is the one that your brainstem is not dead, but you don't have consciousness. So yes, if your brainstem is still alive, then you are alive, but you are just like a vegetable state. Okay. Well, there's a case that a chicken had his head chopped off. That I don't know. So that one may be just chop off the top of the head, but not the bottom. But it will not alive for too long. Okay. So that's the reason why that just back to the brainstem. So if the pressure is too high, then that will force the brainstem to the skull, and then at that time, then that will damage the brainstem, and then the person may die if the pressure is not released. So maybe you have heard from the news, some of the person after they have the brain injury, the doctor will take out part of the skull, so that actually the pressure from the brain can release, so that actually the person can survive until that the inflammation or the pressure reduce, before that you can put back the skull back. Okay. Okay. So something interesting to learn now. Now this is again the arrangement. This is sympathetic Yes. Yeah, partial release and no force to the brainstem, then the brainstem, can survive. Otherwise, if it's damaged, then that will be permanently damaged. Okay. Concussion is different thing. Concussion is actually a sudden loss of consciousness. Okay, someone wants to focus on the lectures rather than the one that is not related to lectures. So those that wants to ask those, maybe we can do it after after I finish the lecture materials, or we can discuss on some of those. That may so those actually topics sometimes is not really related, but that can actually help you to understand the content better. Okay. Let's go back. So to go back to the autonomic nervous system. So there's the sympathetic, so-called thoracolumbar. So this is again thoracolumbar. Actually, thoracolumbar means that the thoracic. So that means that from here. So thoracic means the lung part, and the lumbar is actually right below. A little bit up from the waist. Okay, over here. We'll look at it again. Why is it called the thoracolumbar? So there's a writer from the thoracic and lumbar spinal segment. Okay. Now, autonomic ganglia goes to the caught in the paravertebral chains or subsidiary ganglia. Those are we talked about already. So paravertebral. So the ganglia is actually next to the vertebrae. Okay. Now for the parasympathetic system, this craniosacral. Cranial means that the top part over here. Sacral means that the one that actually at the bottom, all part. Okay. Those are also from the cranial actually from the brainstem. So the parasympathetic is originates from the brainstem, and sacral cord from the spinal cord. Okay. So again, we talk about the autonomic ganglia are located on or near the innervated organs. So we will look at the pictures again later. So in the parasympathetic system, the autonomic ganglia or postganglionic ganglia actually is close to the organs that they innervate. Okay. So here is the pictures again. So this is central nervous system. Okay. This is autonomic nervous system, in which that the neurons projected to the ganglia. The ganglia have the neurons, and then they project to the organs. So this is the paravertebral. This is the subsidiary. So it's away from the vertebrae. Okay. So this is the somatic system, in which that there's no ganglion in between, just projected all directly to the muscle. Okay. So again, this is acetylcholine, and this is noradrenaline. So you can see that the first one, the preganglionic in the sympathetic system, secrete the acetylcholine, and then the next the ganglionic neuron secrete the noradrenaline to the target. Okay. This is the one that actually is subsidiary ganglion, or in the parasympathetic system, in which they both use the acetylcholine. Okay. Sorry. So here is what we mean by that. So here is the sorry, excuse me. Okay. Now this is the spinal cord. all right? This is the sympathetic nervous system. This is the parasympathetic nervous system, okay? So we talk about it, those neurons, they are both coming out from the spinal cord or from in the sympathetic nervous system. They are coming out from the spinal cord, okay? Now the spinal cord actually is divided into different segments. Is it okay? So the C1 to C8, that's a cervical. So what is cervical? Cervical means the neck. Okay, the spinal cord is divided into 3 regions: the neck, the thoracic, and the lumbar, and the sacral. Okay, they are divided into different segments. Okay, so you can see that this is the sympathetic chain. Now the preganglionic neuron is coming out from the spinal cord. So it's coming out from the T1 to L2. So those are thoracic and lumbar. So that's the reason why that in the previous slide, it's called thoracolumbar. Okay. Okay. So those are the preganglionic neuron. And then it's coming out in the sympathetic chain. Okay. So these are the different paravertebral postganglionic neurons. Okay. Now you can see that actually after they come out, so just to don't want to confuse you. So here is from the spinal cord coming out. So this is the paravertebrae. Okay. And then after that, then that will go out to the organs. Is it okay? Now this is the similar from the vertebrae, from the spinal cord going to the ganglia. This is not close to the vertebrae. And then this goes to the target. Now, don't confuse, this is sympathetic. So these are vertebral ganglia. Okay, all those. You can see that. Okay. Now you can see that they actually control different things. So some of those control the eye, the glands, the heart, liver, and so on. And you can see that this one is ciliary ganglia. So this is not close to the vertebrae. So these are this type of arrangement. So in sympathetic, only very few of them are not next to the vertebrae. Okay, ciliary ganglia is actually one of those. Okay, and you can see that there are a lot controlling different things. For example, the gland that sweat gland, blood vessel, hair follicle, even. Now it's a little bit different from the parasympathetic system, in which that those preganglionic neurons are from the cervical or cranial and sarcotic at the bottom as well. Okay, so you can see that from the cranial nerve. So still remember, those numbers are the cranial nerves. So that's in the brain stem. So that come out to control a lot of salivary and the eyes and the so on. So for example, cilia ganglion. So that control your iris. So we'll talk about those later when we talk about the acetylcholine. So those are the brain stem. Now, if you still remember, do you remember which is number 10? What nerve is it? What cranial nerve is it? Yes, vagus nerve. So very good. Now that control the a lot of visual organs. Okay, the heart, the spleen, the stomach, and so on, and the intestine. Now, as I mentioned about the postganglionic neurons for parasympathetic system, actually is close to the organs. You see, so there's no ganglion next to the vertebrae. They are all close to the organs. Okay. So there's differences between the para and sympathetic system. So very good. You still, a lot of you still remember the vagus nerve. Okay, so that's the arrangement of those. So you can see that both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic system control a lot of the organ functions, and that's also the reason behind that. If the brainstem is left, then you cannot stimulate the respirations or control the heart rate as well. So that's the reason why the brainstem is so important. And you can see that a lot of those organs are controlling autonomic system. Actually, they don't need you to interfere. For example, digestions and respirations and the heartbeat. So those are vital for your survival, and you don't need the consciousness to control them. Okay. So far so good. Okay. So then we go to the enteric nervous system. So the enteric nervous system, the nervous system of the gut, it is organized into the so-called submucosa and enteric plexus. So those are the neurons embedded into the gut. So so the gut actually is semi-autonomous, and it can modify by the autonomic nervous system. Now, first of all, what does it mean? So in the intestine or in the gut, there are those two circles. They are muscle as well. Okay. So you still, if you still remember in the biology or in the physiology, have you still remember the so-called pertussis? Do you remember? Yes, one of your students, yes, is really amazed that that's true. The vagus nerve can control so many organs. Yes, yeah. Still remember what is pertussis? Yes. What does it mean? So very good. So movement along the intestine, yes, the movement of, so it's like squeeze, 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 and then we'll push the food along, okay? Now, if you have done some of the, I still remember I have looked at the one of the postgraduate doing experiment in which that he cut out the intestine and then put it in the buffer, and it still can contract. Actually, it's a squeeze and squeeze and squeeze. So this is helping to digest the food. Okay. Now, why is it called semi-autonomous? Because that actually, if you don't control or interfere with it, then you'll just do the same thing. And some of the neurons will control the glands as well. Now, but in the case that that needs to be modified, then that can be controlled by the autonomic nervous system. Okay, so same sense as the central nervous system can control the autonomic nervous system. So, for example, in some of the examples that you can you tell that in what case that will control the the central nervous system can control the autonomic nervous system. Okay, yes. Heartbeat, yeah. So something that you your exposure to something that might be something interesting. Yes, the when you stomach ache, when you are nervous. So when you are nervous, that's the perception. That's the perception for your consciousness. So, for example, when you see something scary, when you facing exam that you don't know how to do the questions, you don't know how to answer the questions. So that's from your consciousness. Now, at that time, you become nervous. Nervous, then that will activate the sympathetic nervous system. Okay, so there's a crosstalk between those now. You see, and then the sympathetic nervous system will mediate the fight or flight response. So at the same time, the sympathetic nervous system will inform the enteric nervous system to stop doing the digestion. Okay, so that's how they connect together. So if they don't have cold sweat when nervous, that's some of those as well. So those are the system that, so before you cannot control sweating, for example, those are the autonomic things. So when you do exercise, because you are heating up your body and the body want to cool down, so that induce the sweating. But sometimes if you're nervous, you can also sweat as well. Okay, that's some of the examples. So that's the reason why what I'm telling you, that the central nervous system and the autonomic nervous system and the enteric nervous system, they are not individual, isolated. They are connected together in mediate different functions. Okay. So now we start to talk about the central nervous system. So here is the central nervous system. This is the brain. This is the spinal cord coming down. So here is another better pictures. Okay. Here is the brain. This is the brain stem. So remember we talk about there's a hole. If you have chance to see a human skull, you will see that they all are actually covered, except there's a small hole at the bottom, allow the spinal cord to come out. Okay, so here's the C1. So and so this is the C1 to C8. So it's from the neck, and T1 to T12. And then, sorry, not T1 to T12, actually it's T and the sarcodic as well. So there's nerve coming out as well. Okay. Okay. So those are the vertebrae actually. Now, don't to confuse that with the segment of the spinal cord. Okay, the spinal cord actually is not all the way down to the bottom of the vertebrae. So you have to be clear that the vertebrae and the spinal cord are not the same length. Is it okay? However, each sections, there are nerves coming out from the vertebrae. Can you see that? okay? But the spinal cord is not going all the way down to the bottom. So that's the reason why when we divided into the vertebrae into, divided into the spinal cord into different sections, is according to the nerve coming out from the vertebrae. So that's the reason why that the nerve coming out, C1, C2, C3, C4, and all the way. So L1 is number. So number region, L2. And you can see that at the sacral nerve actually is coming from here, and you don't see the spinal cord here anymore. Is it okay? One of your class may ask that is the hole the blood-brain barrier? No, the hole is not the blood-brain barrier. We will talk about the blood-brain barrier later. Okay. Basically, actually, the whole skull and the spinal cord is covered by 3 layers of membrane. Okay. We will talk about those when we talk about the blood-brain barrier. Okay. So you see that actually each here, the nerve coming out. Is it okay? Now here is another pictures of it. So here is the vertebrae. Now this nerve is the dorsal sensory neuron, and then this is dorsal root ganglia. Is it okay? Here is the sympathetic system, the sympathetic chain ganglia, or the paravertebral ganglia. So you see it's next to the vertebrae. Is it okay? Okay. So just to talk a little bit about the organization, how we describe the different part of the brain. Okay. Some of the nomenclature of it. So for example, rostral, caudate, dorsal, and ventral. So one of you talk about dorsal root ganglia. That's how we talk about. Sorry. So what does it mean? So in the lower animal, not the lower level animals, for example, in dogs, cats, and rodents, so the nervous system is just like a tube. So a swollen part, the brain, and then that going all the way to the back. So dorsal means that the back, okay? Ventral means the one facing the tummy, the belly. So rostral means the front. Caudal means the back. So the reason why that we talk about, when we talk about later, so for example, dorsal root ganglion, ventral nerve, then you'll see that actually why they're called in that way. Now in human, it's a little bit different, okay? Because our spinal or our nervous system actually is not straight like this. Actually, it's bent like this, okay? The head is bent. So how do we talk about it? So when we talk about the brain, rostrals mean here in the front. Caudal means that in the brain is the back of the brain. So dorsal means the top. Ventral means the bottom. Now in the nerve is a little bit different. From the nerve that is straight. So this is the rostral side. This is the caudal side. This is the dorsal. And then this is the ventral. Okay. Is it okay? So very simple. It's just how you describe it. Now another part that we talk about is how do we call the central part and lateral part. So this is medial. That means that in the middle. The lateral means the side. Okay. Now how do we call how the sections are being cut? Not quite actually. So some of you call rotate the mouse 90 degrees. That's the human. That's not true, because if you rotate like this, then that's like this. Okay, it's just the humans actually the brain is turned a little bit 110 degree like this. Okay, so that's a little bit different. But the same idea why we call it, this is rotary, this is caudal. Okay, so in cutting sections for the brain, because actually for us we are not very good at the three-dimensional, particular before, because that we don't have, when we take pictures, usually two-dimensional, well, when we draw pictures. So that's the reason why that we always, like when we study, we cut the brain into sections. Okay, so how do we describe it? So horizontal plane means like this, cut like this. Coronal plane means cut like this. Sagittal plane means cut like this. Okay. Now the reason behind is actually is help you if you are interested in looking at those pictures, then you will know what do they mean. Actually, there's a donor that donate his body for a scientific study because he is a murderer. He was sentenced to death penalty, and then before he died, he donated his body, and then he let the doctors, the scientists, to cut it into sections all the way from the top, the whole body, all the way to the bottom. Actually, you can search, you can see those images. So that's how they do the cutting and then look at the structure of the body. Okay. So spinal cord. So the human spinal contains some 100 million neurons. The peripheral is white matter, and the central is gray matter. So the gray actually can be seen by the naked eye. So you can, if you have the chance to buy the spinal cord, you can buy a spinal cord, the cow spinal cord from the market. There's a dish actually use that, but that is not very popular these days. So in which that you can have the spinal cord in the dish, or some people would like to, eat the pig's brain. Anyone tried that before? Oh yes, someone say yes. So if you have that, so if you cut it open, yummy. Now actually, maybe young is okay. Actually, it's very, very high in fat content. So if you cut it open, you'll see some of the gray color. That's where the cell body is. The white color, that's the fat actually. That's the reason why the brain or the spinal cord is actually quite heavy in calories, actually, because it's really high in fat tissue. So here is the spinal cord. So it's like a butterfly shape. And those are where the neurons situated. And yes, myelin sheath, very good. So that's myelin. So that's the fiber tract for the spinal cord. The reason behind is actually the neurons needs to go up and down to communicate with the brain. So those are the track that actually are going on. So here is the posterior root. This is the anterior root. Okay. This is dorsal root ganglion. So you can see that actually those are the sensory neurons coming out. Those are the going in actually. The sensory the motor neurons coming out. So if you still remember the paravertebral ganglion, so that's the one that actually the sympathetic ganglion. So it's next to the vertebrae. Okay. So here is the spinal cord. So the contain the gray matters, that's with the cell bodies. Okay. That's divided into so 10 columns. So it's like coming out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10. Okay, with different sections. So each lamina, so each layers will have distinct input and output relations, which reflect a measure of specializations. Okay, so here. So dorsal horn sensory neurons fibers enter in. So that's the reason why. So why is it called dorsal horn? Because at the back, that's at the back of the vertebrae. Okay. So those are the sensory neurons coming in. So for example, this is the sensory neurons, the efferent coming in. The cell body is actually at the dorsal horn, or dorsal root ganglia. So that's the reason why it's called dorsal root ganglia. If you have heard about that, that's called why it's called the dorsal root ganglia. It means that it is at the dorsal root, and then there's a whole bunch of cell body, so situate there. So that's been called the ganglia. So coming in, okay, there might be interneurons, and then that connect with the motor neurons, and then motor neurons will go to the muscle. Okay, now the motor neurons actually is inside the spinal cord. Okay. So white matter. So in the white matter, actually is not just white matter is not being organized. So actually they are organized into different pathway. Some are ascending, some are descending. Okay. For example, some of the ascending nerves, for example, the sensory neurons correlated with the cell body over here, and then sending the information up to the brain. So then there will be ascending part. Okay. They are also descending. For example, the motor neurons from the head going all the way down to the positions, and then related to the motor neurons. So for example, some of those lateral cortical spinal tract, that means that a tract that connect the lateral cortex with the spinal cord. Okay, so you can see that they are arranged into different tracks. Okay, that's the reason why that they have white in color because of the myelin sheath. Okay. So here is some of the example of it. How the neurons are modulate in the locally in the spinal cord. So remember, some of them actually the actions are initiated from the brain. Some of those are initiated, as fast as possible. That's the reflex. So here is one of the example of the reflex. So this is a very simple example of you holding a cup, and then you pour something is too heavy, then your muscle will contract. Okay, so this is the reflex. So how does it happen? So if your muscle, there's a sensory at the muscle. So if it sense that it is being stretched, then it will pass the information to the spinal cord, and then activate the muscle to contract this one. At the same time, that will inhibit this muscle so that it will not contract, it will relax. Okay, so one relax and one contract, and then you hold up the mug. Okay, same thing here. A sensory pathway is always ascending, and motor pathway always descending in the spinal cord. You can say something like this in generally. Okay. Okay. in here is another example. You have, if you are stepping on the pin, and then the sensory will go in, and then it actually related to a lot of different interneurons, so that to make this muscle contract, okay, and then the other one relax, so that the opposite leg can take care, and then stand on the ground. Okay, so those are example of how those neurons can be arranged in these spinal cord like this. And that's the reason why that they have the interneurons to relate to different neurons to exert the functions. So in this case, that to take up this leg, and the other one will stand this leg on the ground. Okay. Okay. So we'll stop here today. Actually, we don't want to start the brain sections yet. So it's just that you have enough today. Any questions you want to ask and discuss? This is a very good question. So one of you asked why the second neurons in the slides, the sympathetic one is unmyelinated. We don't know actually the reason behind. It's just that this is just the observation. But the reason behind is actually we are not quite sure. And the sympathetic system actually can affect the heart in different ways. Another way that actually can affect is actually through the the adrenaline from the adrenal gland. Okay. Any other questions? Is it too boring? Oh, why the brain needs the high fat content? We will talk about that in the myelination. Yes, that's the myelin. Yes, it's the insulation actually. It's help the transmissions of the signal, in which we will talk about it when we talk about the action potential. Good, actually. So you can ask more questions. I mean, it is good for you to understand. Okay. Well, first of those cranial nerves actually, part of it might consider as the somatic, part of it may consider the autonomic. So you can see that those for the parasympathetic one, that's the autonomic nervous system. But those that for the control of your muscle, that can be considered as a somatic. Yes, so another asked about the enteric system. You mentioned that the enteric neurons can contract on its own. So there are pace-making neurons in the intestine, like the heart. So it's not, how do I say it? So it's not necessarily like a pace-making neurons, because those are the neurons that fire all the time. It's just that when this one is fired, then that one is inhibited, and so on. So it's like crap. So squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. From the heart is a little bit different, because the heart is actually a ganglion or a group of neurons, actually pacemakers, and then stimulate the heart. So that's neurons already. Okay. Yes, you can say that. So when you are nervous, actually this activate the sympathetic nervous system that tells the entire nervous system to stop digestions. Yes, so that's the reason why that actually stop digestions. Or in the case of diarrhea, maybe actually to get rid of unnecessary things. I mean, yeah, so that you can respond better. Any other questions? So those are the interesting questions. So you can see that how that they connect together. They can influence each other. Any more interesting questions? So those are actually related to your daily life, actually. And actually, we know more about the autonomic nervous system than the central nervous system. Actually, yes. Now, your classmate asked, so does the spinal cord stop at the lumbar part, but the nerves extend? So actually, what happens that the nerves, let's go back. Yes, so you see that the spinal cord will not extend further after the lumbar regions. However, each sections of those spinal cord lumbar, so we still go back a little bit. So you see that the spinal cord is divided into C1 to all the way to the S4 or S5. So you see that actually from this is this sacral part. You see that those nerves are still coming out, or the thoracic part still coming out over here, all the way down to S1 to S5. That's how they name those sections, okay, according to the vertebrae. Okay, so you stop here. So the spinal cord will not extend further down, okay. Now, one more thing is that whenever there's a traumatic injury that break the spinal cord, whenever that break over here, the neck, for example, then all the sensory and motor function down will be affected. Okay, same here. Okay. No, the nerve is actually, well, you cannot say that it's not part of the spinal cord. So you can see that actually after it's coming out, that becomes the somatic system. Okay. So the lumbar nerve is still part of the spinal cord, but it's not part of the central nervous system. It's coming out already. Why is the position of the cell body important? That's the organization of the cell body is facilitated, is function. Okay. For example, if you want the same segment of the sensory and the motor neurons function at the same sections of the spinal cord. Yes, okay. So I will post it earlier next time. Yes. Because usually I want to review the lecture and see whether I want to add anything or reduce anything. But that's okay. I can still you know update it. Yeah, upload it earlier. Okay. Any more questions? So I will let you go because you may have a class in the next sections that you need to prepare. So I will see you next Monday. Okay, Zoom again. Okay, enjoy your rest of the week. I'll see you next Monday. Okay, bye-bye.